Yo, what's going on YouTube, and welcome back to Gold Line Hockey. It's your boy Kevin Forte, and today we are taking a look at the St. Louis Blues as we continue our they need to do this one thing. And the St. Louis Blues, what is the one thing they have to do this season is figure out what their future is. And again, it's kind of a semantic one because it's not necessarily pinpointing one thing, but it is a very important one thing this year for the Blues. Now, I think a lot of it goes off of what happens this season. You know, do the Blues end up making the playoffs? Do they end up being a potential team that can go on a deep playoff run? And maybe that affects how they do things. Maybe it depends on some of their wily veterans who are on the final year of their contract, whether they want to stay in St. Louis or not, because they also have a say in this as well. So, you may be asking, what are you talking about? So, what you have to look at here is, so let's start off with where they are in the standings. I think that's a good place to start. The St. Louis Blues right now currently sit on the outside of the Stanley Cup playoffs, looking in. They're currently 4 points out of a playoff spot, which is held by the Colorado Avalanche, which is probably not a spot I'd want to bet on, especially if Colorado moves up the standings, and then things get more difficult the further you move up. And Colorado hasn't even been that great to start, and I expect them to turn it up a notch. So that's another team you're going to have to deal with. Minnesota's played very well this season, and I think they could be a potential cup favorite come playoff time. I don't want to jinx it, but I might have right there. You're welcome, Blues fans. You could thank me later. The Jets have played very well. They're also toward the top of the division under their new head coach there, as well as the Dallas Stars, who currently lead the NHL in points in the Central Division with 52. So when you look at it that way, you know, this is a tough hill to climb in the Central Division for the St. Louis Blues, but it isn't impossible. Now, I know they had the tough start with the whole Binnington thing, and every other night this was happening and that was happening. There's teams in a lot more dire straits than the Blues, so I guess in that sense, you have to feel pretty good. You know, the Blackhawks and the Coyotes are basically, they're kaboosh, they're done. You really have Nashville behind you, who's right there. They're still a team that I consider a team that could still make the playoffs, depending on how things go. I don't think they have enough scoring touch compared to teams like the Blues or the Avalanche, so I don't think they will get in. But, again, maybe one less team you have to worry about a little bit later and a little bit closer to the deadline. But the real problem with the Blues right now is, you know, what's going to come next summer here. So July 1st of 2024, this is their free agency list. You've got Ivan Barbashev, Nola Chari, Logan Brown, Alexei Torpachenko, Josh Levo, Tyler Pitlick, Nico Mikkola, Tyler Tucker, Thomas Greiss, and the two biggest names on the board, Vladimir Tarasenko and Ryan Oreilly. Now, both of those guys are on injured reserve. They were placed on there the other day. I think that was more of a cap situation, kind of bending the salary cap for the Blues, but I digress nonetheless. They're both out of the lineup. But those are the two biggest contracts on the Blues' current roster, making $7.5 million each. And, you know, with Oreilly, he's the captain of this team, and Tarasenko is an alternate. So to say the least, these are two very focal point pieces of this team. And here's the other thing. Ryan Oreilly has struggled this year, and Tarasenko as well, to a lesser extent. Tarasenko's numbers this year, still pretty good. This season, he's got 29 points in 34 games. He's got 10 goals and 19 assists. So he's pulling his weight, you know, at the ripe young age of 31 years old. He's still one of those guys that the Blues look to for their scoring. And I think that's kind of something that is nothing really that surprising from the Blues fan base. This is a guy that scores goals. And again, looking at replacing him potentially next year, that's something that I think the Blues have considered when they tried trading him. They kind of think, who's going to score goals for our team if he's not here, right? And there is some guys that can, and you guys will mention them in the comments. But let's not lie here. Tarasenko is a big portion of this offense. Ryan Oreilly, though, is a little bit more of an interesting tale. So he's the captain of this team, 31 years old as well. He has struggled mightily, though, for the Blues this year. And I wonder if it's a combination of Maybe them saying, we don't want to give you another contract because you weren't good. And maybe him saying, you know what, I'm not really happy with how I played and I want out. But even with that said, he still has 16 points in 37 games this year. So he's not that far off from even Tarasenko's numbers. So in that sense, you know, he's got the same amount of goals as Tarasenko. The Blues have two guys here that have put up 20 goals this year between the two of them. And when you're giving that kind of money, the money that they might be wanting, it might be difficult to keep them around. Now, the other factor here, you know, is the fact that how much money do they have left after the, you know, let's say they re-sign both Tarasenko and Oreilly. How much do they have left? And right now they have $11 million in cap space for next season. And I hate to say it, priority, you know, I think they like Scott Perunovich. Probably won't be too expensive, but he's still a player. They need to figure out a backup because Thomas Greiss is 36 years old, and I don't think he will be coming back unless they bring up one of the younger goalies from their AHL affiliate, which is possible. I think Nico Mikkola is going to be a pretty important guy they would like to re-sign. Same thing for Alexei Toropchenko. And then Barbashev is going to be another guy I think is going to be due for a little raise this coming summer. So, you know, the money isn't really there for the Blues. And it makes you wonder, is it more valuable for them to let Oreilly and Tarasenko walk this coming summer, go for a playoff push, and if they walk, then that's it. Because the good news is they do have some good players. They have Braden Shen, Buchnevich, Saad, Kyrou, Thomas. Hopefully you re-sign Barbashev with that extra money that you saved, not keeping Oreilly and Tarasenko. And you're able to sign Mikkola. You know, that's where the Blues should be looking. And I think, that's more what I think they should do. But that's going to be a decision they have to make. Are they going to re-sign Oreilly and Tarasenko and maybe have to trade out another asset just to keep those two around? And you're not going to have the money to keep Toropchenko. You're not going to have the money for Barbashev and Mikkola and let them walk and bring up an AHL goalie as your backup behind, on any given night, hothead Binnington. So I think the Blues are going to have to make that decision here. Or do they kind of just say, listen, we're going to accept the retool, we're going to lose Oreilly and Tarasenko and just call it a day? Or do they commit to, before the trade deadline, saying we're going to try and get for whatever we can for Oreilly and Tarasenko? And again, I think some of that depends on how far out of the playoffs they are. If they're really out of the playoffs, I think it's easier for the fan base to digest that we're going to let them get traded at the deadline for whatever we can get instead of losing them for nothing, you know, during the summer. So it's going to be an interesting year for the Blues. And I think that the idea of letting their captain just walk in free agency obviously hurts. But I think that this Blues team, it's got to be something similar to what we saw Bergeron do in Boston, where he takes a significant pay cut to stay with that team. I think that's really the only scenario we see here for Oreilly and Tarasenko for them to both stay. And I don't necessarily know if specifically Tarasenko would be willing to do that. Maybe Oreilly would, but if they had to choose between keeping Tarasenko or Oreilly, they might decide to go with Tarasenko. So we'll see what happens. Guys, thank you so much for watching this video. If you like what we're doing here at Goal Line Hockey, want to see the latest news around the National Hockey League, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and a bigger subscribe down below. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.